I am so sick of these protests turning Sydney into Melbourne or even Paris. You know, we see this across Melbourne, Sydney, Brisbane, everywhere in this country, these protests for Palestine over and over again. Now, on Monday night, on the eve of the anniversary of the October 7th heinous terrorist attack by Hamas on Israel, well, you've got this vigil for Gaza, 2 years of genocide at Sydney Town Hall by the Palestine Action Group. Daniel Wild, how do we square the circle of free speech and letting people go and have their say, even if what they are saying is really dumb and idiotic? But at the same time, you know, they do have free speech because it's a free country. How do we square this?
Yeah, it's a great question, James, and I share your view. I'm very much in the camp of we should allow as much free speech as possible, and we should allow people to undertake demonstrations as much as they want to, as far as possible in our country, even though I disagree with all of this. I think where the line is firstly when it's repeated, when it's becoming day after day or week after week and becoming highly disruptive. What that means is you've had the opportunity to have your say, you've had an opportunity to peacefully assemble, as is your right, but you don't have a right to disrupt people's life day after day, week after week, which is what's been happening in Melbourne. I also think in Sydney you've had situations where these global icons with Sydney Opera House and the Sydney Harbour Bridge have been commandeered for these very hateful protests. The problem with that is it reflects poorly on our nation as a whole. I mean, everybody around the world knows the Opera House, they know the Sydney Harbour Bridge. I would have thought that there are other places where these demonstrations could take place as well. And then the other point I would say is when you're getting close to incitement, when you're intimidating and bullying people and making people feel incredibly unsafe in their own community, then a line needs to be drawn there. And I think that, basically that's where we are with a lot of these protests.
Well, yeah, and Lee, I want to ask you about this too, because I think that there is a way forward on this. If you say, well, you can demonstrate, but there are certain places where there's just simply an exclusion no-go zone. And in Sydney, that should absolutely be the Opera House. But one thing we saw 2 years ago was the cops were not willing to go and have the fight. Do we need more robust policing to stand up to some of these groups that may, want to use force, but can't be allowed to determine where and when they are allowed to march?
Yeah, I agree. Look, I agree with both your comments. To the point where these protests keep happening time and time again, and now it's under the guise of a vigil. Rubbish. We know what it's actually about, and don't put it under false pretenses of vigil. But the police need to be enabled to enforce the law and do their job. These repeated protests should not be happening at key landmarks. They should not be interrupting people's day of lives. The cost to the government, the cost to the taxpayer that is happening over and over and over again, it needs to stop. So yes, there needs to be greater restrictions put in place, and I totally agree with you, Dan, when it reaches the point where it's inciting hatred towards any other group that they feel unsafe, then this is where the law needs to be enforced. So absolutely support that in every way, shape or form. The public have had enough.
Absolutely.
We're sick of seeing these protests. We're sick to death of seeing the signs and the hatreds, and then it leads to the burning of the Australian flag, and against the Australian way of life, and we have this vicious cycle that's going around. How is this conducive or helpful to us and our issues and our primary way of life here in Australia? I do not see that. So yes, it is a balance. You need to have free speech, absolutely, but do it in the right place, at the right time, without the constant negative impact on the community and the detriment to the taxpayer. If they want to do it, they go out and fund it. They should pay for the times and the wages for the police to come
100%.
And keep it a safe environment.
100%.
So enough. They should get the bill.
I can tell you that in New South Wales, the cops have spent millions and millions and millions of dollars in overtime policing these chuckleheads here. And, I find it so ironic that so many of the people you see out there are good, nice, liberal, tolerant people who are marching essentially in favor of theocratic terrorism. I just find that so bizarre. But I got some special news here, too. Don't forget that you can see a special documentary investigating the rise of anti-Semitism here on Sky News Australia this Wednesday night at 7:30 p.m.